No, hey, listen. Good Irish strength here. We give her the enforcement she needs. Oh, okay. The family. No, I'm just kidding.
And his back.
I'm Irish and Italian. It's hard to pull that off.
And then his back in the back as well. I make sure that you guys are okay. Perfect. How are you?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our hearing this afternoon on the proposed Title 21 Traffic Code revisions. Before we begin, I would like to thank everyone for their work and preparation for today's hearing, including Director Gallagher and the Administrator of Infrastructure Management, Frank Williams from the Department of Public Service, who will be providing this afternoon's presentation. Deputy Chief Kathy Collins from the Department of Public Safety, who will be available to answer questions. I believe we will have a couple of people from the police department. Both Jeff Furby has said that they would be here, but at this point I don't see them. But certainly want to thank Director Collins, who's our Recs and Parks Director, for being here, and my council colleagues, Council Pro Tem Michael Stenziano and Council Member Mitch Brown. Thank you, all members of the public, for taking their time to join us this afternoon and learn more about the proposed revisions to Title 21. It's an exciting time to be over transportation in the city of Columbus. This is a great opportunity to discuss the balances between innovation and safety as it relates to moving people in the city of Columbus. We are a smart city, and we are one that is here to embrace new mobility options for the citizens of Columbus, but we want to do that in a thoughtful and mindful way as we try to balance everyone's interest for mobility options in the city. I would like to remind everyone that there will be an opportunity to provide public testimony. If you'd like to do so, please fill out a speaker slip. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes, and we will accept speaker slips until the end of the presentation. I'd also like to note that Council President Shannon Hardin has joined us. Thank you for coming. In order to get through all speakers, we will likely not be able to address some of your questions completely. However, staff from the Departments of Public Service, Public Safety, and the City Attorney's Office and City Council will continue to follow up with you. The end of the meeting tonight is not the end of these conversations. We look forward to working with each and every one of you on these and other issues in the future. The purpose of this meeting is to review and discuss the proposed revisions to Title 21 of the City of Columbus Traffic Code and to receive public testimony. This discussion is related to mobility devices. That does include e-scooters as an example, but this is a broad definition that will include technology that we probably haven't even thought of at this point. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the definition of what mobility devices are to the City of Columbus, rules for operating such devices in the public right-of-way, educating members of the public on how and where to operate shared mobility devices, and these rules apply to both shared and personally owned devices. First, I would like to introduce Director Gallagher and Frank Williams with the Department of Public Service to provide tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy, Council President Hardin, and other members of council. Thank you for having us here this evening. As we all know, these e-scooters showed up about 3 months ago, and in those 3 months, we've all been working diligently to learn as much as we can with, of course, keeping safety of everyone at the forefront of all of our thoughts and decisions. We realize that as we go through these code changes, that and as we learn more and get more experience even in other cities, that we will be likely following up with possible other code changes and or rules and regulations in the matter of all transportation mobility. So we've broken tonight's presentation into 3 pieces. The first one is we are going to talk about the original rules and regulations that we put out for shared mobility devices. The definition that we came up with for shared mobility devices are small mobility devices such as bicycles, scooters, or other similar mobility devices, including electronic versions that are offered for short-term rental to subscribers on a minute, hourly, or daily basis as a fee for short-distance travel. The fee shall include, but not limited to, per trip, per time period, or on a subscription basis. So please keep that definition in mind as we talk through the first set of rules and regulations, which are for the vendors for the shared mobility devices. The second thing that we're going to talk through this evening will be the temporary rules and regulations that were put in place specifically for e-scooters, and that was for where the users of those e-scooters could ride those devices. And the definition of an e-scooter is a two-wheel device that has handlebars, a floorboard designed to be stood up on when riding, and is powered by electricity. The electricity is stored on board in a rechargeable battery. So as you read through those rules and regulations that were just put out a week or so ago, remember that those are for the e-scooters. And then lastly, and the main purpose for being here tonight is to talk through the legislation that is before council, and that legislation is for mobility devices. This includes, but is not exclusive of, the shared mobility devices and e-scooters. So the next question would be, what is a mobility device? And the definition we have for mobility device means a small motorized or electronic device such as an e-scooter, e-bike, or other similar device as determined by the Director of Public Service. A mobility device does not include those designed solely to be used by a child or those used as assisted mobility devices for persons with disabilities. We tried to keep that definition relatively broad because this is an ever-changing field, and we know that as soon as we finish up these code changes and rules and regs, that there's likely to be something else that comes into town, and so we wanted to be able to be relatively flexible and work with those companies. So those are the three main topics that we're going to hit tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Frank Williams to talk through the specifics of each one of those. We also have, after that presentation, some frequently asked questions, and then we thought we'd go ahead and address those questions with those answers and hopefully ease some folks' minds with those answers, and then we'll turn it back over to Councilmember Remy. So thank you again for having us this evening.
Thank you, Director Gallagher, Chairman Remy, President Hardin, and members of council. Mr. Chairman and members of City Council, my name is Frank Williams, Administrator of the Division of Infrastructure Management in the Department of Public Service. Thank you for the opportunity to address you concerning mobility devices. Unofficially, we have had, as the City of Columbus, over 300,000 shared mobility device rides and by over 100,000 unique users. As Director Gallagher mentioned, I will briefly attempt to discuss the rules and regulations for shared mobility devices, how we got there, the temporary rules and regulations for e-scooters, and then, of course, the legislation that is before council. For each section, I'll attempt to look at also the spirit or purpose of how we got to where we are, some of the points of importance, definitions as necessary, as well as some of the processes and considerations and also goals within what we've done. Also, we have taken a lot of time to scrub things such as social media, 311 interactions to make sure to, while we were going through this process, to make sure we develop those common sense approaches that would solve a lot of the questions and answer a lot of the concerns of the citizens throughout the city. One of the things that we look to do, especially as it relates to the shared mobility device approach, was to make sure we were developing a holistic approach to this industry. Making sure we understand that the industry is fairly new, we wanted to make sure that we approached this from a place that we didn't choke the approach or choke the opportunity for these shared mobility devices, but to make sure that we had a holistic approach that impacted the entire city. That not just was a situation that would just happen downtown, but something that folk throughout the city would be able to utilize. We definitely ended up in this place due to the launch of one of the vendors in early July. However, I think it should be mentioned that we were already in a pilot program for dockless devices beforehand. We started in June with a dockless bike pilot in a few neighborhoods, and we were looking to gain as much information going forward with that. We did develop throughout that process, utilizing our current approach was through our permitting process to kind of approach this from a place of being able to not preclude small businesses, but any business that might come up that wanted to be a part of this process. We wanted to make sure that there was room for those folk to get into the industries. Again, making sure that, to be clear, this was just focused at the vendor level and how the vendor would operate within the right-of-way. These rules also were flexible enough to allow the director to take information back and be able to respond in a thoughtful way based on the things that we would learn as we went through this process. So our goal wasn't to over-regulate, but it was to leave us with enough room to be able to react as data came in and we were able to see how people were using the services and in what manner. Some of the things that we looked at for the shared mobility device rules were the opportunity neighborhoods, holistic citywide approaches that didn't just focus on the central business district, focusing on affordable mobility options, and of course, as you probably heard, the different options that would allow the use of some of these shared mobility devices without a credit card or for those that may not have a smartphone or some of those other items. Also part of this permitting process, the vendor is required to do educational outreach and train and teach folk about their service, not only just how to use a device, but how their service works and how it can impact their overall life and quality of life. We also wanted to make sure that that process supported smart city initiatives. Again, going back to data and sharing of data so that we could develop holistic approaches for the advancement of mobility options throughout the city. Then, of course, we moved to rules and regulations for e-scooters. And as the director already defined them, our purpose was to develop those regulations around the usage of the scooters within the city's public right-of-way, to get something effective that would be immediate while going through the legislation process for the necessary code changes. Coming from that, as you're aware, we look to make sure to define where these items should be used, and we came with in bike lanes, traffic lanes, bike lanes, or shared use paths that are within the right-of-way, not on the sidewalk or in crosswalks. Definitely using best practices as far as not being able to carry another person or packages and or bundles that would keep you from keeping both hands on or keeping your hands on the handlebars. And of course, making sure to identify where not to park these items and respecting the private property of those private property owners. Then we moved to legislation for the code changes within Title 21 while we're here today. This is focused at the operator and the citizen, and it applies to all mobility devices, not just shared mobility devices or e-scooters for that matter. Safety concerns drove or is the driver for most of the rules or the majority of the approaches, and that's for all citizens, pedestrians, for cars, privately owned property, and it took on a collaborative approach. In other words, we tried to bring in as many stakeholders, as many people as possible to get opinions and approaches throughout not only the city, but also throughout the country. to find what best practices are. Now, keeping in mind that it's difficult to find best practices on a industry that's not even a year old, but we did all we could, and also going back to, as I mentioned earlier, we've written things in a way that gives the director the ability to respond as we learn more from this industry. We looked at different cities. I won't name them all, but we definitely looked at least 10 different cities and how they've been reacting to mobility devices overall, and also NACDO guidelines as well to take a look at how we would do things. We also, one of the bigger things that we looked at was the impacts of mobility devices to other city, state, and government agencies and how we would address those going forward. Definitely not saying we've figured it all out. We haven't. But we've done all we could and did our due diligence to make sure that we got as close as possible, and will continue to move forward. Our goals and expectations of the shared mobility devices permit, we looked at making sure that as we move forward in this direction, to be able to identify the things, as Director Gallagher mentioned, that we would have to go back and possibly change to match what we learn. So every time we learn something, we understand that there's going to be a bit of a trickle-down effect that we may have to react in other areas. But we've done things in a way that we can do that as smoothly or as painless as possible. Our goals for this legislation was to provide common sense guidelines, support multiple mobility options. As the director mentioned, we know right now we're at e-scooters, but what happens next year when the next thing comes about? Do we have to, we wanted to make sure that we wouldn't have to start from scratch each time. We wanted to make sure to put the goal up front to enable educational opportunities. How can we best, when we're talking about the right-of-way, regardless of what mobility device we're using, there are common sense approaches that fall underneath that umbrella, regardless of what item you're using. We wanted to, again, make room for the next mobility option, provide a code of conduct that supports what is already out there. In other words, how people act on these devices, whichever one they choose, and also develop stakeholder support. The director already mentioned many of the different definitions, but again, some of the things that were similar to bicycle regulations, and I'll define some of those things as it relates to the roadway. Mobility devices must be operated on a roadway and shall be operated in any bike lane, traffic lane, bike path, bike trail, or shared use path in the right-of-way where practicable, obeying all traffic laws and exercising due care when passing a standing vehicle or one proceeding in the same direction. Persons operating a mobility device upon a roadway shall ride not more than 2 abreast in a single lane, except on shared use paths or parts of roadways set aside for the exclusive use of bicycles. Sidewalks and crosswalks. Mobility devices shall not be operated on sidewalks nor within a crosswalk except when necessary to go on or off the adjacent property or to park the mobility device after the operator has finished using it. We mentioned earlier freeways. Operation of a mobility device on a freeway system is strictly prohibited. Passengers and packages. An operator of a mobility device shall not carry another person or child at the same time. No person operating a mobility device shall carry any package, bundle, or article that prevents the driver from keeping at least one hand upon the handlebars. And that was one that came up even the 11th hour when we acknowledged, and one of the folk in our group acknowledged a person riding one of the scooters with the baby in the sling riding down the street with it, and we said, no, we can't have that. So again, those are items that I mentioned that while we're learning, we're trying to react as soon as possible to support that safety initiative. Earphones. No person shall operate a mobility device while wearing earphones over or earplugs in both ears. Parking. No person shall park a mobility device upon a sidewalk in such a manner so as to unduly interfere with pedestrian traffic or access. This includes ADA ramps, areas departing to and from buildings, and at transit stops. No person shall park a mobility device upon any street, including parking spots and landing zones, or as to unduly interfere with vehicular traffic. That definition broadened quite a bit because we learned things from our dockless biking program where people were parking inside of the actual COTA bus stop, and some of you may have seen that happening. And also part of the vendor responsibility as it relates to shared mobility devices is they have to partner with us in talking about ADA ramp blocking, and we've had a lot of discussions internally to make sure everyone understands the respecting of the right-of-way for people to be able to access the pedestrian access routes. Signal devices and brakes. Every mobility device shall be equipped with a white light on the front and a red reflector on the back. A mobility device shall be equipped with adequate braking systems. Operations of the devices. A mobility device may not be operated on a street, on any streets if the posted speed limit is over 35 miles per hour, unless in a dedicated bike lane or shared use path within the right-of-way. The speed of the unit's operation of a mobility device at a greater speed than 20 miles per hour is prohibited. I have gotten a lot of calls, and going back to just reminding that when we first did the shared mobility device rules and regulations, that was before we had made a determination of whether they would be on bikes or sidewalks. And so we do have to make an adjustment. We acknowledge that we have to make an adjustment in those rules and regulations because of that decision being made after the fact. But again, I only point back to that just to show how fluid this has been over less than 60 days. Age restrictions. No person under the age of 16 shall operate a mobility device upon any street or highway or any public or private property used by the public for purposes of vehicular travel or parking except on a shared use path. No person under the age of 18 shall operate a mobility device without wearing a helmet. Those are some of the main issues or things that we've changed or added to this title. If it pleases the chair and the members of council, I would like to go into some of the frequently asked questions that we have compiled.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. One of the questions that has come up was why streets and not sidewalks? Streets are made are for the use of transportation, and unfortunately, many see that as only meaning cars. As a large city, we need to embrace other modes of transportation. The streets are the public's right-of-way, and we need to share that space with other users, and we acknowledge that. Mobility devices can go up to 20 miles per hour, and that is too fast to be on sidewalks. We limited the streets that they can operate on to 35 miles per hour or less, so the speed differential is not too large. So we look for what we would consider a bit of a sweet spot as far as how fast they could go and the streets that they would be comfortable on. We looked at, and we did quite a few ride-alongs going out to really see what we would feel comfortable with, what we thought would be best practice, using some of the information from other cities. But again, we kind of acknowledge Council President Harding and Chairman Remy and Council that we have things that we can pull best practices from other cities, but we are the smart city. There are cities that are actually looking to us for direction as well. So, and we have different anomalies from our city that maybe some of these cities, for example, Santa Monica or Los Angeles, that we have that they don't necessarily have. So we had to be very careful in just cherry picking everything that we saw. We had to go out and make sure that it actually applied to the city of Columbus properly. Parking and blocking ADA. This is extremely important to us. We have put parking requirements for the devices into all three documents: shared mobility device rules and regulations, the regulations for scooters, and also here for your consideration in legislation. And we have also, within even in the shared mobility device rules and regulations for the vendors, we've made sure that that is part of their educational process. We've been very clear that the devices cannot impede pedestrians in any way, and that the pedestrian access route needs to be available at all times. If you see a device blocking pedestrian access, you should contact the vendor. The vendor's contact information is required to be on every device. Insurance, this has been a topic that has come up quite a bit. Condition of the vendor's permit is for the permit holder or vendor to have a minimum liability insurance coverage of $1.5 million. This insurance is between the customer and vendor, is a business practice, and that the city did not seek to get into the middle of. This is a topic that continues to come up, and as we learn more, we may decide to address the issue in a different manner. However, at this time, we don't want to put such a burden on the user of these devices that they are unable to use this as a mobility option. Our concern was this became a bigger issue when we found that people were using these devices not only for the trips for lunch during lunch hour, but when we started finding out people were actually using these devices to get to work, to actually get up in the morning and use these devices to get to and from their home to their place of business and back. And we did not want to get into a place where we overregulated for an issue that we haven't even found that we have yet. The street is not safe for scooters. The city is putting riders in danger by making them come onto the street. Again, streets are for the use of transportation, and unfortunately, many see that as just for cars. As a large city, we've kind of worked hard to really look at what that balance is and make sure that everybody understands that these are shared spaces for all types of mobility. Many have talked about their commute is already congested and complained or have made concerns about having to share the road with scooters, saying that the city is just asking for trouble. Scooters are environmentally friendly with their energy consumption, have a small footprint, and are convenient and inexpensive. Of course, they're not for everyone, but we do ask that anyone using the public right-of-way or the public roadways remember that these roads are for all modes of transportation and not just cars. The upside is that as more people get comfortable with alternate modes of transportation, people will try them, whether it be buses, bikes, scooters, walking, the less congestion we'll actually have. How can they operate without a license plate? We're treating these very similar to bicycles, which are not required to have a license plate and have been ridden in the streets for years. Is a driver's license required to operate them? How will we keep minors off of them? A driver's license is not required. However, we do ask that all users of mobility devices know and understand all traffic rules and laws. For shared mobility devices, the current companies require users to be 18 years old and have a valid driver's license. But again, that is the business relationship that we are not seeking to get in the middle of. The Director Gallagher made a great point while we were going through this process, and why we landed on the 16-year-old place was that it's kind of around that time where people start to get permits or start working to get their driver's license, and where there can be an expectation of understanding the rules and regulations of the roadway. Will these scooters be able to operate on multi-use, shared use paths? Again, everything that we're talking about is pointed toward the right-of-way. And we do understand that we have to work to do more as far as education, and Director Collins is here today to speak to some of that, but again, everything that we're talking about is right-of-way based. This concludes my presentation portion of the summary of the changes in Title 21 Traffic Code as it relates to mobility devices. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have or any concerns you might want to address.
Council Pro Tem Stenziano.
Thank you, Chairman Remy. Couple questions in terms of the process and kind of how we got here. I know you mentioned on the liability insurance piece, we are requiring it, but we don't want to put it in the legislation because we need to learn more. What more are we anticipating to learn to make sure that riders and companies and everyone is protected appropriately?
So what we have in the rules and regs currently is for the vendors, and the vendors have to carry insurance for their devices. and Frank can go into that a little bit more, it's how we treat anybody that's getting a permit for us to have something within our right-of-way, that they are then responsible for that. What we are not having, what we don't have shown or have required anywhere is that the individuals carry insurance. So right now, like for car insurance, obviously, you go buy car insurance if you're driving a car. For bikes, most homeowners' insurances will cover bicycles. They are very clear about that, but because scooters are so new, it's quiet on that front with homeowners' insurance. So it would really depend on the insurance, specifically on whether they would cover something if something would happen to you personally. It would be your insurance, whether they would cover that or not. So that's where we try not to get into the specifics of how would we, currently right now where we stand is we're not real sure how we would even track that to make sure that someone has that insurance with their home or a separate, whatever you call it, where you go out and get something particular, like flood insurance or something. So that's what we're trying to continue to determine what we would do. And everybody's like, well, why, what about, it's like a bike, and for bikes, the homeowners' insurances do cover them. So that's kind of where that difference is, if I didn't make it even more confusing.
Follow-up?
I was going to say that our office tried to reach out to a number of our insurance companies here in town. Really, there is no product that we can find at this point, and even talking with the two vendors that are here, that covers people, individual riders that ride. So it's because it is such a new emerging technology. We have, it's rider beware as it relates to individuals. If you have an umbrella policy, I mean, obviously an umbrella liability policy, obviously something like that would work. But in this particular case, we're not clear of any product that's available today. So we certainly are addressing the requirements of the individual vendors being here as well.
Can I follow up with a different line of thinking? So, Frank, you mentioned that the data shows 300,000 rides with 100,000 unique users. Where's that data? How's that being provided? And where can folks follow or keep track of that in the public?
Thank you, Councilman. To the chair, President Hardin, to the councilman. As I mentioned, that is unofficial data that I have received from the vendors that are currently operating. Because we are still in that grace period before the permit, we don't have access to direct data. So again, that's unofficial data that I've been provided from the vendors themselves.
Follow up? So is there any reason we're not asking the companies that are coming to the city, wanting to be permitted through the city's process, to require them to share that data with us?
Yes, that's part of the permit process, but the permit, they're working through the permit process now. And as I mentioned, it's unofficial data because I did ask them, and that's what they gave me. So data is part, again, supporting the Smart City Initiative. Data, we're requiring real-time data so that we can actually verify the data and not just get spreadsheets and things like that. So we're actually requiring vendors to come in, set up dashboards to where we can look at, and actually where my staff can go out and actually get on one and make sure that the data has integrity. So that, especially if they come and ask and say they want to increase numbers or things like that, the director can, look at that data, and there can be a justification process moving forward.
I have one more question, Chairman. This actually, I think, may go to Director Collins from Park and Rec. So I had someone reach out to me concerned about the proposal and the rules and regulations allowing for scooters to be used at metro parks. And curious what discussion, concerns, or collaboration you or service have been involved in about any concerns Metro Parks may have, or where we landed to allow it on those bike paths, is my understanding as I read the legislation.
Thank you, Councilmember Cinziano, Chair Remy, President Council, members of Council. Thanks for including us in on this conversation. And I'll start off, I'll answer your question, but start off with a couple of steps to try to separate things, because I think the director and her team have done a phenomenal job of separating this out in terms of right-of-way and transportation pieces. We in the parks and trails community obviously are watching the scooter issue as well, but we have to separate those issues because they are separate rules, separate under the code. So to answer your question directly, we in Columbus Recreation and Parks are looking at this from a park rule standpoint for the 353 parks we have in the City of Columbus Recreation and Park System, as well as our Columbus-owned Central Ohio Greenways trails. And those are not being considered right now in this particular code piece. The way the current system is set up, as you all are aware, we have a phenomenal partnership with Franklin County and Columbus Metro Parks. They're great partners here. They, of course, have the side of the business, which is our major metro parks in the region. They also are joint owners with us in a lot of our trail sections, so we work together a lot on the Central Ohio Greenways. We, in fact, as you know as well, we have a lease and an MOU with the Franklin County Metro Parks to operate our regional Greenway trail system. So even the property that we own, that is a Columbus property, that is a trail section of the Olentangy, is managed and operated and leased to the Franklin County Columbus Metro Parks. Under the Metro Parks rules, which is, I have a copy right here, under section 22.2, Greenway trails shall remain open at all times to allow commuting and transportation uses. Persons shall not operate motorized vehicles, including electric personal assistive mobility devices, on Greenway trails. And it goes on. I won't hassle you with reading all of it, but it's very specific in those rules. So right now, our agreement and our MOU with Metro Parks says that we are there in terms of the rules of scooters on our trail system. In terms of parks, Section 919 of Columbus City Code addresses park rules. There is not a section of the park code that addresses the use of motorized vehicles in parks. There are some things in terms of car usage and staying under a certain speed limit and snowmobiles, but there is nothing to address these types of devices. So we did ask our commission in our September meeting to consider this. We knew that this public meeting was coming. We would take input from this meeting as well as address this particular issue with park rules at our upcoming October commission meeting. We've been in touch with Councilmember Brown, Chair Brown, who's in touch with our Recreation and Parks in charge of our Recreation and Parks Committee to discuss that process and what that would go through, knowing that today's hearing was happening.
Thank you very much. Any of my other colleagues? President Hardin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the department and all those folks who have been diligently working on this, these regulations and policy changes. It was stated that the safety education would be left up to the individual companies in terms of informing individual riders. What guidelines do we put on that education? What is expected in that education, and how are we going to make sure that it's routine and regulated information for our constituents?
Thank you, Council President Hardin. So in part of the rules and regulations for the shared use devices, we have a whole section that lays out for them the process for community outreach, and part of that will be required to get their permit. But it talks about differentiating the public right-of-way versus private property, the deployment of the shared mobility devices in opportunity neighborhoods, where they're allowed to go, how you access them, on and on and on and on. And we have told them that plan has to be approved by us. And so we've worked very closely with specifically the two that are currently here in town, Lime and Bike, to work through that process. Now, we say it's all on them to educate, but of course, I think you've all seen that we've been putting out lots of press releases. We've had it on our social media. We continue to try to do that outreach. We continue to have conversations every time we see somebody riding on the sidewalk or going the wrong direction against traffic of, well, there's somebody else we haven't reached yet, and so how can we do a better job of reaching out to them? We've looked to see what some other cities have done and gotten some really good ideas there that we've passed along to Bird and Lime, and then also have just kind of started talking through with our staff. It's an ongoing process.
Councilmember Elizabeth Brown.
So in my non-expert opinion, one of the benefits of expanding types of transportation in our city is that it gives people more options to actually commute to work. So there's the benefit of obviously using it recreationally and getting around the city and enjoying the city, and that's wonderful. But if people can utilize new forms of transportation to actually commute and make it to their jobs, especially when we have last mile concerns, that's great. Is there an opportunity with the companies to dictate as the city that a portion of, I know that there's some kind of crowdsourcing that goes on with collecting them, charging them, and then redispersing them. Is there, do we have any kind of leverage to tell them we need to see this number of scooters redispersed at certain COTA stops that we know really lack last mile transit options?
So, Councilmember Brown, currently in the plans, we don't get into those specifics of what we're allowed to tell them and not allowed to tell them. We do ask that a certain percentage of them are in the opportunity neighborhoods and up to a certain percentage is in the downtown area. I will say that Frank has had lots of conversations with Lyman Bird, and they have been fantastic about working with us to really try to spread those around and get them into the areas that we would like to see them. I would be interested if we call them up to see what they have to say as well. But I would definitely say they are open to that. And as we go through this, one of the things that we have done in the current shared mobility device rules and regs is we've limited the number that they're allowed to have as a total here in the city, but we have said based on usage and how these devices are being dispersed throughout the city that I as a director can make exceptions to those rules and allow them to have more. And I think as we work through that process, part of that will be, okay, you can have more, but we would like to see X, Y, and Z as part of allowing you to have more devices. And that's why we've tried to kind of keep it nimble as we learn and see what we want to do.
Okay, thank you.
And welcome to my colleague, Elizabeth Brown. Thank you for joining us. Councilmember Mitch Brown.
Mr. Williams, a question. How will the department ensure that the scooters are not blocking sidewalks? How are you guys going to deal with that?
Councilman Brown, thank you. One of the ways that we're looking to do this is first off through education. Education is going to be first, also with the communication with the vendors especially, but again, this legislation is for all devices, so there's a part of it that we're going to have to be learning, and some of it I'll defer to Director Collins or on some of these issues, but from the public service perspective, the first portion is the educational portion. And then, of course, those that are shared dealing with the vendor themselves. Right now, we have certain provisions written in the rules for that turnaround time to make sure to move things as necessary. For the most part, so far, we have both vendors have done very good at reacting when we've called them, and we've checked what we're doing right now. Council member is checking the 311 logs to see as these calls are coming in, what the reaction times are, and so far we've been in pretty decent shape. But again, I think the idea or the approach has been more about education, where it's not so much, we haven't really run into so much of an issue of the rider leaving it in the wrong place. First off, we're talking about the staging. Myself, typically what I'm doing is going out, or my staff is going out, taking a look at where the staging areas are, because even though sometimes they're not necessarily blocking ADA areas, they're not in the best locations. And so we've been talking about different locations, especially with the vendors, not knowing the city and its layout and some of the traffic patterns. So we've been educating in that regard and making sure that the staging areas, but also what we've been trying to do is, as we see people on their last mile portion, to educate where we can, or also both vendors have done helmet giveaways and things like that. So those are those unique users that are working with those vendors. So they are first to educate and starting to help and using that advocacy, whether it be social media and things of that sort, that has started to, we've already seen it actually show results, especially even in the downtown area.
So are you saying to the public that they should dial 311 to report a problem if they see scooters in the walkway?
For shared mobility devices, they can contact the vendors. They have the information on the actual devices. All mobility devices at the time, right now, it would be a 311 service request, and we would respond as we can.
Thank you very much. I'd like to also recognize from the City Attorney's Office, Melanie Tobias and Jeff Furby. Thank you for coming this evening. Deputy Chief Collins, do you have any comments this evening?
Thank you. I know a couple questions that have been posed to our department involve some statistics out of fire as to injuries, and I have some of those. And then I know would also talk a little bit about enforcement and the philosophy that we've kind of passed down. As with every new piece of mobility device that's going to come in here, there's going to be new rules, and in order to embrace these new types of mobility, we're going to be rather lenient, and there's going to be a learning curve for everybody, and there will be lots of warnings. And as I think Director Gallagher said, as they see someone out there, we would anticipate everybody hopefully will know the rules. The beautiful thing about these is mirroring the bicycle rules is it's a common sense approach, and most people are at least aware that there are bicycle rules and laws that can be followed. We will, though, there's still the ability to ticket in the most flagrant of violations. And if there is an accident and it is found to be that the scooter rider is at fault, they will be issued a citation. So people need to use common sense and know what they're doing when they get on the scooter, know the local rules, know the local laws, and follow those laws. But there will be lots of warnings, lots of understanding during these growing pains. As to injuries, I'll just add that the Division of Fire started keeping statistics when the scooters hit the street, and they went back, and these are not necessarily totally indicative of what they could find. They did comb through all the EMS reports and found that if the word scooter was mentioned in the narrative, they pulled that report as part of the statistics. They took the ones out that might also involve a wheelchair as a scooter. So I'll just give you some quick stats. Since 7/14, there have been 35 medic-related runs specific to scooters that they could find. 24 of those ended up in transports to the emergency department. The average age involved in the accidents, or in the injury, I should say, are 18 to 40. And out of those, they were also, the majority of them were concentrated downtown. Out of the 35, 20 of them, the injury was of fail to control, hitting a pothole, going off a curb, just couldn't control the scooter. 6 of them involved striking a pedestrian, 4 involved vehicles, 2 of them involved alcohol, and 3 were unknown. So that just gives you I know there's been some questions about, is this a drain on EMS? EMS doesn't think so at this point. These could easily be pedestrians that would be making up the same amount of injuries. So, and lastly, I just want to thank the Department of Public Service and Director Gallagher for including public safety in the discussions as we work through this, because ultimately, when there is something tragic that happens to them, that's going to fall to public safety to have to deal with, whether it's an accident, and a serious injury, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Deputy Chief Collins? I do have one question. What if somebody were to get on one of these intoxicated? What would be the ramifications from a legal standpoint?
They could be charged. They could be charged with, I believe, operating a motor vehicle under the state code, because this is still a motor vehicle under state code, and there are some state provisions that still apply outside of city code.
Thank you. Do any Melanie or Mr. Furby, do you guys have any comments or questions?
Good afternoon. I would just add that under the proposed ordinances under review today, for that scenario where someone was impaired, they could be charged. Just like a person on a bicycle can be charged with an OVI, a person on an electronic scooter or electric scooter could be charged with an OVI, and that's specifically addressed in the proposed code changes.
Thank you very much. All right, now I'd like to invite up Sam Reed and Lou Gentile, who are representing Byrd, to share a few remarks.
Chairman Remy, President Hardin, thank you. I'm Sam Reed with Byrd. First of all, we'd like to thank Mayor Ginther and his team, particularly Director Gallagher and Frank Williams, who's just been really terrific to work with. You know, I oversee several markets for Byrd, and I can tell you that both in terms of the ridership, the community's response, and the way the government here locally has been thinking about regulating scooters is as good as we see anywhere, really across all those metrics. So we really appreciate their partnership and look forward to continuing to work with them as you all consider the long-term rules around electric scooters. So, like I said, I'm Sam Reed. I'm with Byrd. So who is Byrd? We are a last-mile electric vehicle sharing solution dedicated to bringing low-cost, environmentally friendly transportation alternatives to communities across the world. I think when we launched here in Columbus, Columbus was about the 15th or 16th city for us, and we're now in over 80 markets all across the world. And so we're moving fast, and we're learning a lot as we go. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to reduce traffic congestion and parking problems. We look at the 40% of car rides that are 2 miles or less, and we're looking to replace those trips with a more efficient mode of getting people around in ways that does not clog the streets and is, of course, safe. We help to reduce carbon emissions because we're obviously 100% electric. So far, in our nearly 70 days here in Columbus, we've helped remove nearly 200,000 pounds of CO2 emissions on the over 100,000 rides that car rides that have been avoided by people choosing to ride a Byrd instead of riding a car. We're an affordable last-mile transportation solution as well, much more so than other rideshare services. Doesn't cost the city anything to implement, and it's very affordable for the user, $1 to start and 15 cents a minute thereafter. We waive that initial dollar fee for active duty military and veterans of the military. We also waive that initial dollar for anyone on state or federal public assistance so that we really strive to ensure equitable access. Safety is our #1 priority at Byrd. And we do a lot by way of education and also in terms of how we handle our equipment. So we instruct riders to always wear a helmet. We've given away tens of thousands of helmets nationwide. We give everybody that downloads our app and does a single ride, we will send them a helmet for free. We did a helmet giveaway and safety event here in conjunction with Smart Columbus at the Experience Center a couple weeks ago, where we gave away over 100 helmets and did ride demos, and we would welcome the opportunity to do much more of those. Our units only go 15 miles an hour. They come out of the box at 22, but we dial them down to 15, again, for safety reasons. We require that everybody who uses our service has a driver's license and that is 18 or over, and of course, 1 rider per Byrd. We have instructions on both the app and the footboard about how folks are supposed to ride. That's follow all traffic laws, ride in bike lanes and roads, and do not ride on sidewalks. So we share that the city's mission there, and rider education is really at the core of everything we do. Safety also means keeping the right-of-ways clear. And we require all users to take a picture of where they park their Byrd before they end a ride, and we give instructions to park neatly and don't block sidewalks, ramps, entrances of business, et cetera. We're also working with cities on designated parking zones, and we'd love to partner with Columbus to do that in high traffic areas to keep these out of the way of pedestrians. We're also committed to the city, as Frank had mentioned, to remove any Byrd inappropriately parked within 2 hours if you contact us. They're also just 25 pounds, so they're pretty easy to move. We do what we call smart scaling at Byrd so that we don't put too many Byrds on the street at any given time. We won't increase our fleet until there's an average of at least 3 rides per day across our fleet. We're currently averaging close to 5 rides per bird, and about 1.6, 1.7 miles per ride. So there's no doubt that there is a huge demand in Columbus for alternative forms of transportation, more so than really in many of the markets that I oversee. And the city is wise to have recognized this in its rules and regulations and giving us the ability and flexibility to increase our fleet based upon demand and usage. We pick up every bird every day from the streets as well. We drop them off at their nests at 7 a.m. in the morning, shut off birds every night around dark, don't let users initiate a ride after 9 o'clock, and then each one is removed from the streets and we do a safety check. It's our charger team that is made up of local folks that are picking these up, and it's a great way for folks in Columbus to earn extra money. We're actually on track, based on the stats I saw this morning, to pay out over $2 million to chargers here in just the first year that Bird will be operating. We also, in addition to permitting fees that we agreed to pay the city for having these on the streets, we share $1 per bird per day with the city, and we give that back to the city to build more bike lane infrastructure, to promote safe riding and maintain a shared infrastructure. We believe that the more riders that feel safe in the street, the less folks will be riding on sidewalks. Last thing I wanted to mention is that, as the city had alluded to, opportunity zones really important to us. Again, we have this one bird program that we call it, where we have allow folks to avoid that first dollar fee. But we've also looked at placing nests in opportunity zones, as has been instructed to us or suggested to us, and we've got now, I think today, somewhere about 25% of our fleet originates in opportunity zones. Again, education is going to be core to everything that we do here, but we're really excited about the partnership that we have with Columbus. It's one of our best markets today, and we're really pleased at the open and collaborative spirit at which the city has worked with us thus far, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you for that overview. That was very informative. Do you have an inclement weather trigger for not putting birds on the street if there's 10 inches of snow or heavy, heavy, heavy rain?
Yes, Chairman and Council Member Brown. So that's I'll take that two different ways. To answer your question, yes, we absolutely do. If we know it's going to rain all day, scooters don't operate well in the rain, and we will not put them out. I would think that there's been several days that we've probably done that here. I can go and check, but yes, we absolutely, for inclement weather, if it's not going to be safe to ride, we will not put birds out. We can also, stop operations in the middle of the day if we know something is coming that we have to respond to quickly. I've also obviously been asked about wintertime. We're a very new company, and this winter will be really one of the first ones that we have had to deal with, or the first one we had to deal with. I think, again, we're going to respond to the demand, and we're going to listen to the communities that we're in. If we're seeing way less riders during the wintertime, we'll obviously reduce our fleet numbers. I don't think we'll ever truly go away, but there may be some birds that fly south for the winter.
The reason I ask is mostly thinking about snow, although I guess rain would apply too, just in terms of when we have kind of a later day weather event and congestion is made dangerous, not just difficult, but more dangerous, right? Having an influx of scooters on the road would be challenging to that sort of trying to have a safe and a commute home for most people as possible. So that's why I asked.
Yes, we absolutely agree, and I think we'll just look to work with the city on when we're deploying our fleet and when we're not. But I think there will be a natural reduction in the fleet size and potentially, during extended stretches of inclement weather where we will not be operating.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Yes, I'm a strong advocate for wearing helmets on bicycles, motorcycles, or anything else, to be quite honest. So would you restate for our community again your policy with regards to helmets?
Yes, sir. Chairman and Councilmember Brown, I really appreciate that. Helmet usage, we require it in our rules. We give every person that downloads the app and takes a ride the ability to have us send them a helmet for free. I think that it's $1 to ship, but otherwise free. We've given away tens of thousands of helmets. You know, I will say part of this is going to be a culture shift. Not everybody that rides a bike wears a helmet, and certainly today, not everybody who's riding a scooter wears a helmet. We'd like to see that at 100%. You know, I remember when I was growing up, I'm a snow skier. When I was growing up and I learned to ski, nobody wore a helmet. If you see somebody on the slopes today without a helmet, it looks weird. And so I do think that part of this will be a culture shift that happens. And as we see a rise in the amount of alternative forms of transportation on the street, it will also open up, I think, new markets to, you know, so that cheap, affordable, safe helmets will be available on street corners. Thank you.
Council Pro Tem Stenziano.
Thank you, Chair Remy. I know when we met, we talked a little about insurance. Can you provide an overview of the insurance that you all carry? I know it's above and beyond what the regulations require.
Yes, sir, and Chairman and Pro Tem Stenziano. We currently cover, we have a $2.5 million general insurance policy, and we have a $1 million per unit that is on the road. We have also named the City of Columbus as an additional insured on that policy, and we've also indemnified the city for any sort of damages that may arise as a result of the use of our scooters.
Quick follow-up. And then as you heard earlier when I was asking the director and the department, Bird worked with any cities to make sure there was individual coverage if it was the city providing it to users. Is there a way to build that into maybe the user agreement or contract? Are there other examples we could point to? I know it's new for Columbus, but you guys now have 70 across the world cities you're working with.
Yes.
Are there examples you could point us to and maybe be willing to work with the city to get us towards making sure we have our riders covered as well?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We're looking at right now at optional opt-in coverage for riders. We don't have that ready to go today, but my hope is here in the coming weeks that we'll have something to offer. And then obviously it's going to be state dependent. Each state is we'll have to find a carrier in each state that will be willing to do it. But we feel pretty confident that we'll have some more to share there soon. But that's something that we're working on, and that's as a result of the conversations that we've had.
Thank you very much. I do have one question. Talk to me a little bit about the lights that are on the individual birds.
Yes, sir, Chairman. And we actually we have a light on the front that I'm not sure of the exact specific lumens, but they are the street standard as you would have with any vehicles like that. We also have a rear light. The lights are on whenever a ride is in progress. The rear light also acts as a brake light when somebody pulls the brake as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next, I'd like to invite up Kyle Bevenauer, who is representing Lime, to share a few remarks.
Good afternoon, City Council Chair Remy, members of City Council, and City staff. My name is Kyle Bevenauer, and I'm here today on behalf of Lime, the nation's largest dock-free smart mobility company. We are grateful for the City of Columbus's commitment to ensuring residents have access to flexible, affordable, and sustainable transportation options. My job at Lime is to oversee our Central Ohio operations. I'm a Columbus native. I attended Olentangy High School and graduated from Ohio State, so I could not be more excited to help solidify our city's deserved reputation as the smart city leader. Lime has worked for more than a year to bring our fleet to Central Ohio. All the while, we have worked in close collaboration with city staff, including many visits with Public Service, Recreation and Parks, CODA, neighborhood area commissions, Yay Bikes, and many more. We rolled our first bikes in neighboring Dublin in May, before expanding our bicycle operation in Linden, Clintonville, and near South. Later this summer, we expanded to Ohio State and added our dock-free electric scooters to our fleet. We have continued to be impressed with ridership in Columbus as residents and visitors have adopted a new way to get around without getting in their cars. Most impressive was a Friday earlier this month where over 6,500 rides were completed in one day around the city on Lime S scooters. We're grateful above all for the collaborative spirit that Mayor Ginther, city staff, this administration, and city council have taken to embracing a new technology. And we are excited that Councilmember Remy decided to hold this public hearing and has taken a leadership role on mobility opportunities. Shareable mobility holds huge promise, but it also requires education and community engagement. That's why we've met with multiple area commissions and scheduled a number of public events, including helmet giveaways and safety demos. Lime is committed to continuing a proactive approach towards safety and educating riders on responsible riding in the roadways. I would like to compliment Director Gallagher, Administrator Williams, and their staff on their draft ordinance, which balances transportation innovation with meaningful safeguards for the public. In particular, I salute the drafters for allowing future fleet increases based on ridership data. Our national data shows that in major cities, 40% of our rides begin or end near a transit stop, and 60% of scooter riders report that if not for an available scooter, they would have ridden in a private vehicle. Simply put, every trip on our scooters is potentially one less car on the road during rush hour. It is that much less carbon in the air or runoff in the river. To document this and other benefits to the city, we share our dashboard with city staff so you can see the impact that we are having at no cost to the public. Additionally, our data reports can help the city visualize traffic patterns and usage trends, key information as you consider where to make investments in, for example, bike and scooter lanes, and as you look at first and last mile programs. Likewise, it can be useful as the city partners with COTA on bus routes and connections in the rapid transit on Cleveland Avenue. I should also note that many cities we work with have plans to leverage our data in their funding requests, a material benefit to the city. We are happy to work with you and your offices to refine shared mobility policy as we move forward in the market. Ensuring equitable access to affordable transportation is one of our key values at Lime. So we've developed Lime Access, which is the industry-leading equity program. Qualifying low-income riders get half off of our scooter. What's more, they can pay cash at more than 30,000 retail locations. And with our text to unlock feature, you don't even need a smartphone to use our products. However, even the most generous equity program will not meet local needs if we do not have a sufficiently large fleet. So, as I said, we are glad the city is open to increasing the fleet in the future. I might also suggest that the city develop a separate cap for bikes and e-bikes, so we can make those modes available without counting against our scooter cap. With a fixed, inclusive cap, we are incentivized to bring only the most profitable vehicles, meaning our Lime S scooters. Notably, Lime Access riders can ride our pedal bikes for just a nickel. We would encourage policies that allow for us and other providers to use these different modes in downtown and within neighborhoods and take full advantage of the Lime Access program. Lime values this administration and council's leadership in smart mobility. I love serving my hometown. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councilmember Brown, any questions? Okay. Council Pro Tem Stenziano.
Thank you, Chair Remy. So we heard from the other company about their advocacy for helmets. What does Lime do to advocate for safety in helmets?
Councilman Stenziano, thank you for the question. We have a very similar approach. Our users, after taking a ride, can request to have a helmet shipped to them, as well as we've been proactive with helmet giveaways as well. Last Friday we did one at Smart Columbus as well.
What's your age policy for Lime? What's the youngest that someone can ride it, and what are the requirements behind that?
Council Chair Remy, thank you for the question. 18 years and older is our requirement, which is also stated on all of our products.
And same question to you, what are the lights on your mobility or on your scooter?
Yeah, very similar. We have LED lights on the front and then another red LED light on the back.
And hours of operation, and likewise as far as weather is concerned?
So we do operate 24 hours a day. Our stance on it is that not everyone has a 9-to-5 job. So a lot of times somebody may need access to a scooter when they're leaving work in the nighttime. For the most part, with an early deployment of our scooters and kind of the usage that we're seeing, most of our scooters are being charged overnight.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Obviously, we're going to be running past our 5:30 deadline, but it's not a deadline. We want to make sure we get through everybody. And we have about 15 speakers here today. So we ask that you keep your remarks to 3 minutes. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll make sure that any questions that you may have are answered after the fact. Both city staff, city council staff, and public safety will be available to answer those questions. But I will call up, our first speaker is Kelly James, and then on deck is Donovan O'Neill. So if Mr. James would come forward, we'd welcome your testimony. Thank you for coming down to council, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello. I'd like to thank City Council for affording us this opportunity to speak today. I am the owner of my name is Kelly James. I'm the owner of a small company called Electric Ave. It's the first e-rideable company in Columbus. We launched quietly in March and have been well received by the community. We are a small local business with big aspirations. We started as a rental company, but plan to be a full-fledged e-bike share company by the first quarter of 2019. In researching the history of city share companies, one of our goals was not to be a nuisance to the city and the community, like other cities have experienced. Our e-bike share model is very unique in the way that it works and actually brings a new way to experience downtown Columbus and other surrounding cities and suburbs. Our concern is with City Code 904. With that being said, I'd like to introduce my partner, Laura Graff.
Thank you. My name is Laura Graff, and I am actually a policy developer for the state of Ohio. So Electric Ave seeks to foster a mutual rapport with the proper city departments, and we defend the recent shared mobility rules and regulations issued under City Code Chapter 904. But a few of them are quite discouraging, and particularly the cost burden associated with the data and the fees sections. Currently, it is fiscally impossible for Electric Ave to purchase and install technology in all of our devices to adhere with the city's data demands, not to mention the privacy concerns that come with them. The regulations under the fleet section state the service must tie into Smart Columbus common payment system once developed, which leads us to question whether the compliance with their system would require further technological advances costing even more money. Electric Ave is a small minority startup that is locally owned and operated. We cannot compete in the same capacity as Lime and Bird, the national leading competitors. These national companies are equipped with a vast amount of money and resources that we have yet to establish. Whether intended or not, the regulations are impartial to these national multi-million-dollar companies, resulting in disproportionate adverse impacts on smaller, locally based enterprises. Therefore, Electric Ave proposes that the city customize the shared mobility regulations so smaller organizations are preserved. We advocate that the city establish a subset of regulations applicable to small, locally based enterprises. Will the city consider this for businesses with less than 50 employees, which have revenue less than $5 million, and who have their physical offices based and established address within the city limits?
Thank you very much for your testimony. I am going to ask Director Gallagher to speak on this. We conveyed their organization does not operate into the right-of-way, so their permitting fees would not be required, but I'll let you address that a little bit further.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Remy. So these rules and regulations are for companies who are conducting their entire business within the city right away. So that's where you go to get the scooter, for instance, or any other mobility device. My understanding is for you guys, you actually either deliver it to the people or they can come to a rental, like a...
Currently, but next year, we plan to be a bike share where you could literally, like Bird and Lime, go up to the bike and rent it as such.
Okay.
With our affiliates and then our partners.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I think that that's where we're a little unclear, but we don't want to be restricted to grow as a local business either. So even though it may not apply to our current concept, we have goals. We may want to set up for an event, downtown or, wherever. And we don't want to have to be subject to the regulations that you are currently suggesting, Lime and Bird.
Well, and the good thing about the shared mobility device rules and regs is that just comes directly out of our department and actually doesn't need to go through the code and legislation process. So that's something Frank and I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about, because that's something that's new and different. And again, we haven't come into contact with that before. So happy as we kind of all learn and go through this process to work with you and figure out what we can do.
Thank you.
Yep, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Director, and thank you, Mr. James and Ms. Graff, for coming down this evening. Thank you. Donovan O'Neill, and after that, Mark Conti. If you would state your name, address, and any organization you may be affiliated with, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My name is Donovan O'Neill. I'm started a grassroots organization called Scooter C-Bus here in Columbus. I live in Reynoldsburg. Do you need my full address? Okay. Okay, 7715 Dowling Court, Reynoldsburg, Ohio. Chairman Remy, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Again, my name is Donovan O'Neill, and a few weeks ago I started a grassroots organization called Scooter C-Bus. We believe that dockless rideshare services like Bird and Lime and others, as we heard from just moments ago, give Columbus fast, cheap, clean alternative forms of transit, providing more transit options to more people. And we intend to see this innovation stay and grow here in Columbus. I started this effort as adoption was taking off, and leadership, not just here in Columbus, but across the state and country, were starting to put in place regulations and limitations on riders and operators that ultimately could drive these mobility options like this out of town. In some cities, leadership demanded that these companies leave, even as local businesses were making new investments to earn the business of these rideshare customers who were starting to find their locations around town. To Mayor Ginther's credit, members of this committee and council, considering this ordinance, that did not happen in Columbus, and thank you for that. This ordinance as written achieves what we feel is common sense regulation. To be clear, the ordinance around the ridership rules that are put into place feel is common sense regulation focusing on enforcement of right-of-way laws and establishing guidelines for rider safety. These rules mirror rules for bicycles, something advocated for from the beginning, helping ensure that individuals who are already familiar with one set of rules can quickly apply them to new technology, while also ensuring that we treat efficient mobility options equally. These rules strike a good balance on enforcing pedestrian right-of-way while giving dockless rideshare scooters a place on the road. As we move past implementing rules for riders, I do believe the city can do better by changing the current rules in place on operators. I think the prior person to testify lays a good foundation for that. Setting caps on the number of dockless rideshare companies that can operate in Columbus, how many devices they can provide to their customers, and a per-device fee protect those early into the marketplace and could potentially inhibit the ability for the next wave of companies to provide competition in Columbus. This barrier, while not a problem immediately today, will be in the future. I look forward to doing my part as a responsible rider to use the excellent infrastructure in Columbus as I use dockless rideshare to see more of the 614. And I thank Council for considering these common sense ridership rules before them in Ordinance 2539, 2018. With that, members of Council, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Conti, you're up next. If you could state your name, address, and any organization you represent. And following is Doug Arsenault.
Hi, my name Chairman Remy and members of council. Thanks for this opportunity. My name is Mark Conti. I live at 863. Yeah. I live at 863 Kleiner Avenue in the Short North. I'm here as a private individual, so you may know me from a number of organizations, including Transit Advocate Organization, but none of them have had the chance yet to actually take a firm position on any of this because it's all so new. So I am here as a private citizen. But I've been involved with a lot of transportation issues in the city over the years, including being a former member of the city's Transportation Pedestrian Commission. I would just say that, generally speaking, the new rules and regulations and the proposed ordinance are extremely reasonable. I'm in favor of that. I think we've uncovered with the sudden influx of these scooters a number of things. One is that I do a really good Grandpa Simpson when the scooters run past me on the sidewalk. But I'm glad to see that there's going to be some regulation how to get them off. The key there is going to be educating, of course, the users, and then also some adequate enforcement. And I think what we've also seen uncovered is some, if I can borrow the phrase, irrational exuberance of the users. I've seen a lot of users just kind of rush out and start using these things, really excited, and they're not fully realizing yet, though I see that now, they're starting to realize these are a device. They could fall over on them when they trip on potholes. They can run into things. And so we're starting to see very quickly some better responsibility on the part of the users. But I think what we've really uncovered here is that we need safer streets. We need more bike lanes. We need especially more protected bike lanes. The Sharrows have been great, but we're starting to see that they might not actually do any good. There was at least one study that came out last year that showed that Sharrows weren't really effective and our energy could be better spent elsewhere. So like I said, I'm generally in favor of all this, and I would love to see the city redouble its efforts on getting additional bike lanes and doing more traffic calming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conti. Mr. Arsenault, and after that, Sharon Montgomery. Mr. Arsenault, if you can state your name, address, and any organization you represent, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilmember Remy, Council President Hardin, is missing, but members of City Council and other stakeholders and city staff. I'm Doug Arsenault, the Central Ohio Transit Authority's Public Affairs Administrator and Chair of our Mobility as a Service Task Force on Partnerships with Mobility Providers. We're located at 33 North High Street, just around the corner. As the region's transportation leader, COTA supports mobility choices that relieve residents from car dependency and encourage efficient use of our roadways. Thousands of Central Ohioans already use these shared use mobility devices on a daily basis, with more than 40% of trips beginning or ending near one of our stops. Further, 7 of the 9 communities where these devices are deployed are home to double-digit percentages of zero-car households, including more than 20% of families in downtown Columbus. These devices are more than fun. They've become a viable commuting option and potential first last-mile solution for those connecting to our recently redesigned and award-winning bus network. COTA's team of mobility experts has thoroughly reviewed the proposed legislation and generally supports its tenets, and thanks city staff for their great work on them. As a primary Smart Columbus partner, we support the call for data availability and the commitment to diverse payment options, including cash. Most of all, we support the legislation's focus on safety, including helmet requirements, precautions for nighttime use, the focus on education, and the diversion from sidewalks to roadways. To build on this commitment, we encourage the city to continue exploring regulations that support the viability of these devices and avoid punishing users for choosing smart mobility options. As such, COTA encourages the city to direct permit fees and other costs towards the expansion of infrastructure that supports the use of shared mobility, including bicycles, scooters, and transit. At least 3 riders of the 12 reported in the past 2 weeks have been hit by cars in recent weeks, demonstrating a need to provide proper infrastructure that protects all roadway users. We as a community must rethink our allocation of urban space, particularly our roadways. After all, an average 15-foot single occupancy vehicle takes up the space of 2 to 4 bikes or scooters, and a bus can carry 60 people in the same space as just 4 cars. That's an efficiency rate of 4 to 15 times as many residents moved on our increasingly congested city streets. To quote Mayor Ginther, "Mobility is the great equalizer of the 21st century. Roadway equity is needed to reach this commitment." Further, we encourage the city to explore mobility device parking, for both shared and owned bikes and scooters. Working together, the city, providers, and CODA can provide dedicated parking zones that prevent obstructions to pedestrians and other vehicles and keep these devices orderly on our sidewalks and at bus stops and other CODA facilities. CODA is happy to serve as a resource, given our role in the Smart Columbus projects that will directly involve these shared mobility devices, including mobility hubs and multimodal trip planning and common payment system. As the region's mobility advisor and solutions provider, CODA looks forward to working in close partnership with the city and other mobility providers as these regulations evolve to match the mobility revolution underway. Thank you.
Council Pro Tem Stenziano.
Really quick question, and thank you, Chair. I know you guys track all your numbers. Have you seen any impact on the circulator yet with the introduction of scooters in proximity to where the circulator runs?
Not specifically the CBus, but ridership is up over 10% year over date. We, of course, did our trans system redesign, which affects that, our CMAX line. I mean, all the technology upgrades, CBus ridership fluctuates. A big piece of that is also the Short North construction. We do see many folks using scooters as an alternative when they get to a bus stop that is blocked off because of construction. So instead of getting in their car. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Ms. Montgomery, you're up. And after that, we have Aaron Sink. Please state your name, your address, and any organization you may be representing. Welcome back to council. Thank you.
Chairman Remy and committee members. I'm Sharon Montgomery. I live at 572 Bonington Way in Gahanna. I'm not representing any organization. I'm here to thank and support you regarding traffic safety with the proliferation of shared devices and all the other kinds of road use, and to make sure I understand some of the proposed amendments. The modes of transportation we now refer to as last mile and/or active have benefits, but they make the big picture of road use even more complex. I'm relieved and impressed that you are taking a comprehensive look at the various vehicles now using the streets and sidewalks. I've been concerned with the piecemeal approach in the Ohio Revised Code. There are other fairly new transportation devices, and there will be more. A piecemeal approach to each one is an inefficient use of time and could result in inconsistencies that make it very hard for the public and law enforcement to keep track of who can do what on which device and in which place. I recently emailed each of you and Smart Columbus my summary of Ohio Revised Code provisions for all the different kinds of road users: pedestrians, operators of motor vehicles, and operators of muscle-powered vehicles. I found 29 different road users. Number 30, electric bicycles, is being addressed in pending House Bill 250. Numbers 31 and 32, electric scooter operators and motorized skateboard operators, haven't even been addressed at all yet. Different provisions for safe operation apply to different road users currently. Some differences are unavoidable because of the significant differences in the vehicles themselves. Other differences appear to me to simply be a result of not being careful enough to be consistent. In 217301E in your ordinance, I'd like to confirm my understanding that the texting law does apply to operators of bicycles and mobility devices. In 2014, you very wisely expanded your 2010 texting restrictions for motor vehicles to vehicles, which then included bicycles. Section 210151 in this ordinance specifically includes e-scooters and other examples as part of the definition of vehicle. I interpret this to mean e-scooter operators can't text while operating. By giving examples in 210151, instead of using your new, more comprehensive term mobility devices, you seem to be keeping open the possibility that there might someday be a kind of mobility device that won't be considered a vehicle. Am I interpreting this correctly, and is this what you intended? One other point of clarification, in 217305, no, I have a typo there, I'm sorry, which part? It says these devices may have an audible signal device, but then another section says that the operator shall give an audible signal before passing a pedestrian. So am I misreading this, or are you expecting operators without the signal to move at the pedestrian's slower pace, or did this just accidentally slide through unnoticed? Thank you for planning ahead for safety instead of cleaning up after the mess.
Thank you so much, Ms. Montgomery. Director Gallagher, could you point out the part about texting and then answer a question in regards to the audible alert given to the pedestrian?
Councilmember Remy, I'll have to go back and read those specific pieces. However, I would say with the texting, just like with any other vehicle, and that is considered a vehicle, they have to follow all traffic control laws and regulations.
I want to make sure. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. And we can get in touch afterwards and talk about the other.
Thank you very much, Ms. Montgomery.
Thank you.
Ms. Sink, and up next. Oh, I apologize. Go ahead, Ms. Tobias.
Thank you. With respect to the audible signal, so I think the code section 2173-05A3, talking about an audible device, means that you can affix some type of horn to the mobility device, just like you could affix a horn to a bike. So that's not prohibited to have that on there. It's not a requirement. And then when you are required to give an audible signal, if you don't have a horn or a device on your bicycle or mobility device, you would use your voice. Coming around to your left, so you could do that vocally.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sink, and Christopher Merkel is up next.
Good afternoon, Chair Remy and members of council. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify on the legislation regarding e-scooters before you today. My name is Erin Sink. I live at 63 Hanford Street here in the city, and I am one of the growing number of bicycle commuters in the city, and I'm pleased to represent Yay Bikes here today, a bicycle advocacy and education organization dedicated to helping people safely and comfortably ride bikes for transportation. First of all, I'd like to commend city administration and city council for moving swiftly and thoughtfully around the introduction of e-scooters and creating predictability around their use. As a slow-moving vehicle and vulnerable road user myself, I know that predictability and visibility are paramount to safety and ensuring all road users reach their destinations. It is with this in mind that I recommend and encourage council legislation that classifies e-scooters as vehicles, similar to other slow-moving vehicles such as bicycles, buggies, farm equipment, and aligning with the legal frameworks that already exist to govern use. Slow-moving vehicles must be operated in the roadway, preserving the sidewalk as a safe and protected space for pedestrians and those using mobility assistance devices. They may utilize the entire travel lane and may be passed by faster vehicles when it's safe to do so. Vehicles must meet a host of other requirements for safety, many of which we've discussed here today, and that are already recognized by and familiar to motorists and other road users. For example, vehicles are required to use front and rear lights 30 minutes before sunset until 30 minutes after sunrise during inclement weather and in other low light conditions. Signal intent with electric or hand signals when turning or merging lanes is also required. We have some small concerns about the implications of limiting access of slow-moving vehicles to certain roads. Bicycles and scooters having access to roadways is necessary to maintain their viability as a fully functional transportation option, and not every street is connected to a dedicated bicycle facility, so I urge you to consider that and the barriers that can create to mobility. And of course, we at Yay Bikes are always welcoming and encouraging the development of dedicated bike facilities. Finally, as the adoption of this and future mobility options continues to rise and more vehicles of various types become users of those dedicated bike lanes, I would ask that you work to ensure the adequate and equitable distribution of roadway space for vulnerable road users to ensure safe and efficient traffic flow. In other words, at some point with growing use, whether it's scooters or bicycles or something else, we will need to expand bike lanes where appropriate. And then by incorporating these recommendations into the legislation, I believe that council can and will strike the needed balance between allowing access to these exciting new transportation options while encouraging predictable operating behavior and protecting the safety of all road users. So, we are all in this together. We at Yay Bikes look forward to working with you now and in the future to improve the city's transportation and trail networks and make sure we all get safely to our destinations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sink. We appreciate your testimony today. Christopher Merkel. And up next is Jordan Davis.
Thank you, Chairman Remy, member of council. My name is Christopher Merkel. I live at 194 Dakota Avenue, and I have two concerns. The first is a follow-up, I suppose, on Councilmember Brown's question to Mr. Williams about enforcement, but specifically with regard to enforcement of the blocking of the right-of-way in bike lanes, because unlike the sidewalk where it might just be an inconvenience, it could be significant safety hazard to a cyclist who encounters a, for example, scooter blocking the right-of-way in a bike lane. And so in that case, I think I would have to respectfully disagree with the city attorney's office recommendation for lenience to begin with, and recommend that as far as scooters and other mobility devices blocking the right-of-way in bike lanes, that there be specific enforcement codified in advance of, or yes, in advance of any potentially injurious or life-threatening accidents. The second, as a resident and an area commissioner in Franklinton, I definitely appreciate the potential for shared mobility devices, in particular e-scooters, to present a great affordable mobility opportunity for lower income residents of the city. But that said, I think that will only be the case if the city only licenses shared mobility companies that offer a cash payment option that does not require the use of an internet-connected mobile device. I know that Council President Hardin is fond of saying that if it isn't for everyone, it isn't for us. And I think that that sentiment should definitely be applied to the licensing of shared mobility devices in Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any comments from Director Gallagher? I'm sorry, Mr. Furby?
There are currently code sections on the book for blocking the right-of-ways, whether it be the sidewalks or the paths. And I think the leniency that Director Collins was talking about was for people who don't understand the moving violations at this time as they apply to the scooters. As far as blocking the right-of-way, though, I think that would be enforced immediately because it is a danger issue.
And the enforcement would be on the company or on the individual?
It could be either. If an individual were to set a device, any kind of object in the right-of-way blocking the bike lanes or the sidewalk, they could be cited currently.
And so I guess my recommendation then would be that there be some sort of codification that the city could access the data of the company to make sure that they knew who the most recent rider was, so that it was enforceable.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Merkel. I will tell you that one of the companies did share with me today that they're very shortly going to be offering a public reporting tool, so that if somebody saw somebody acting aggressively on the rider, as a rider, or blocking the right of way, it could be reported. They do have real-time data, and that data would then be used against that rider. And he expressed to me that after 3 times they'd be banned from their system. So those things are coming. Obviously, it's fast-moving. Our next speaker is Miss Davis. Sorry about that. And after that is Mr. Robinson, Hugh Robinson.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Remy and Councilmember Brown. I'm going to first speak as a personal user. So about a little over a year ago, in April of 2017, I gave up my car to live a carless lifestyle in Columbus. I highly depended on CODA and Car2Go and KOGO to get around. When Car2Go left the market, it sorely impacted my commuting abilities. It ended up costing me a lot more money to use alternative services. I was dependent on a lot more rides from friends, and my schedule was harder to keep and to manage. With the introduction of these dockless shared micromobility services such as dockless bikes and dockless scooters, I've been more able to get to where I need to go on my timeline in a manner in which keeps my budget down as well. Just like riding a bike when I was a kid, there's some learning that goes with it. I fell a few weeks ago on a scooter, but it was because of user error. I was in no danger in the circumstances that I fell, fortunately, but I did fall and I had some scrapes and bruises. I use scooters approximately 2 times a day. And through that, I've learned that not every environment that you take a scooter is safe, and that includes our roads. But in general, roads are the right places to be. It's better to be on the road than on the sidewalk, just as a bike is more belonging on a road than on a sidewalk. But that does not mean that we still don't have work to do. Now, if I put my Smart Columbus hat on as representative of the Columbus Partnership, I have to say my personal experiences inform my work. And there is no question that change is inevitable in transportation, and our transportation ecosystem will become more multimodal, more dynamic, and definitely more shared. And so overall, the introduction of these scooters is a good thing, not a bad thing. Innovation is coming to Columbus, and that's a good thing. We can be ahead of it. We will learn how to ride scooters just like we've all learned how to ride bikes, but it's going to take some education. Smart Columbus is committed to becoming a community education partner with companies to ensure that people know how to learn, because frankly, learning in an urban environment is a lot harder than learning on a neighborhood road. So we will be your partner to help the community learn how to use these, and we encourage the community and the city to think about how to be a partner for these services and infrastructure. So thank you for addressing this in a really productive manner. We're glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. Appreciate your testimony today. Mr. Robinson, and up next is Joe Motil.
City Council, my Columbus family, fellow primates, my name is Hugh Wesley Robinson, and I have purchased an e-scooter for myself, and I travel downtown daily. I just want to tell you guys I have saved 15% by doing this, so I don't have to pay for parking or for gas anymore. It is amazing. I like to say that over the past couple of months, my consideration has turned from advocacy, and this is trifold. Pretty much I'd like to say that downtown it is too packed. As far as traffic and parking, these things are going to help us immensely. All right. The best thing I can say is that the sidewalk is a issue. If we can figure that out, sometimes going down Broad Street, you guys, it's really dangerous for me, so I have to jump up on a sidewalk occasionally. If we can figure out how to get the bike paths everywhere, that would be awesome. The lady just before me said something is very important as well. Some of the bike paths are not super safe. I've noticed this. So if we can go back over and check that. For instance, I live over near German Village. A lot of those are one-way, so we have a one-way in and a one-way out. We just need to make sure that we have ways for the neighborhoods for people to get in and out safely to go to downtown. That would be one of the other things I would suggest. Other than that, I would just like to maybe propose a couple more ideas. I like this idea with the helmet. If we can get everybody to wear helmets, that'd be a really good idea. I was reading also that for bicycles, most of the wrecks that happen when they try to go across intersections and cars can't see them. I tend to stop at intersections no matter what. That may be something we may want to consider as well. Yeah, I just want to come up here and make sure that we do not, whatever we do, make it so there's licensing for these things. Don't over-regulate them. Don't try to make it so we have to pay a ton of money. This is very helpful the way it is. If you guys can continue doing that, I would be really appreciative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Motil, if you could welcome back to council. If you could state your name and address and any organization that you represent.
Chairman Remy, Councilman Brown, Joe Motil, reside at 167 West Cook Road in Columbus. I feel City Hall completely dropped the ball while the scooters mysteriously fell out of the sky from companies Bird and Lime, and I personally believe City Hall was expecting the arrival of these scooters. I think Bird dropped off theirs approximately July 11th, Lime dumped theirs off around August 18th. And the scooter share company Bird is valued around $2 billion. Lime has a valuation of approximately $1 billion. City Hall, I feel, failed miserably by allowing a private company to use our public sidewalks and streets to open up a business and make money without any type of regulations or permits for that length of time. I think the city they'll arrest somebody for selling Buckeye necklaces on Lane Avenue during an OSU football game, but for not having a vendor's license, but you allowed the public safety to be put at risk while waiting 2 months to come up with some type of legislation or emergency orders for electric scooters. And although your proposed regulations, I think, are well-intended, I don't believe they're going to be enforced for the most part. For the most part, they won't be complied with by those who ride scooters. For example, this past weekend, I witnessed 4 scooters being ridden in my Clintonville neighborhood. A young man and woman were attempting to ride on one scooter together. I'm not sure if they accomplished it or not. We were going opposite ways. A young lady was riding with headphones on. Another wiped out while striking a raised section of sidewalk, and the last person was riding on the sidewalk too. All of these riders were on the sidewalks. I've also witnessed people carrying their groceries while riding scooters and also on the Olentangy Trail. And I would be surprised if many of these scooter riders have ever even ridden bicycles on the streets of Columbus, and now they are on scooters on our streets and our sidewalks, and that concerns me considerably. And as for the police writing tickets for these violating the regulations, I think it's laughable. I'm quite sure the police are going to consider enforcement of these proposed regulations as a very, very low priority, but I will predict an uptick in emergency runs by our EMS, which in turn will end up costing the taxpayers more money and possibly causing delayed response for time for other life-threatening calls. Although I won't be surprised if there are life-threatening calls for scooter accidents as well. As a professional construction safety manager for the past 13 years and someone who's been biking the streets of the city for about 50 years, I think the scooters could be a recipe for disaster. I think you're allowing what's viewed by many as a hip new trend, alternative transportation mode that is here to merely solidify Columbus Smart City status, and that really outweighs the overall public safety of the public. And in closing, my concern really is not about, those scooter riders that are in attendance today promoting this and individuals who are coordinated enough and understand the use and are going to do it correctly. It's more, I would say, about the recreational users, those who just think you can jump on these things and take off into the streets, have never been on the streets before, even on a bicycle. I think the design of the scooter with its small wheelbase and the road conditions and such is a big issue as well in terms of safety riding these things, as some have already indicated and as I indicated, striking, raises and bumps and what have you. And again, that is another concern of mine, is just the basic design, road conditions, and so forth and so on. So I'm not here to saying I'm in favor of a ban of the scooters, but it's a safety issue that I am concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Motil. Miss Elizabeth Young, and then following Mark Pierce. Apparently, Miss Young has left. So, Mark Pierce, thank you very much. And then Daniel Foss.
Good afternoon. Hi, members of council. My name is Mark Pierce. I'm a local neurologist. I live at 60 East Spring Street, so I scooted here. I did. Yeah. And that actually is the first thing I wanted to talk about. I spend a lot of my time, many days, saying how important it is to wear a helmet. And you'd be amazed how few people listen to that. So I wonder if there is, rather than being punitive, I think we all get very good at telling people what not to do, if there would be some way that could be brokered through the companies themselves or even through the city, that there's, rather than a tax for not wearing a helmet, a stipend or some sort of an incentive that would say, good for you, you've done the right thing, and perhaps, as with skiing, the environs will change. So that's me as a neurologist. As a private citizen, I love these devices. I think they're delightful, I think they're fun, and I think they're incredibly useful. That being said, if you've tried to ride one on Neal Avenue, it is terrifying. And I also find myself sometimes on the sidewalk. And I would encourage leniency, as we have already discussed, that, yeah, the road is a scary place for a mobility device, just as the sidewalk is a scary place for a pedestrian. And I think with respectful and thoughtful use, which, as the gentleman prior to me mentioned, is maybe not the norm, or maybe it is, I would not say that full sidewalk abandonment is necessarily the appropriate approach. The one other thing I wanted to mention that I had prepared is I love the 24-hour access of Lime. I frequently work shifts in the emergency department, actually, and end up having to park very far away because afternoon is not a great time to park. And I would much rather be going 15 miles an hour through campus at night than I would be walking, because I see other types of safety events happen that are not related to mobility at all. They're related to people. I wanted to address what the gentleman before me said on 2 counts. I think it's awesome if somebody's able to take one of these things to the grocery store and get a little bit of what they need for the week as opposed to having to drive there. And I had one other thing that I wanted to say, because I also don't think it's a problem that the people that ride these haven't ridden bikes. Maybe it's a cool new opportunity to do something other than a car. That's all I got. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pierce. Appreciate you coming down to council. Daniel Foss, and then Paul Niekirk.
Thank you, members of the council, for having me speak today and holding this hearing. My name is Daniel Foss. I just moved here to Columbus about 4 months ago. I work for an artificial intelligence company called NCI downtown in Columbus, and I ride a Bird or a Lime every day to and from work because it costs me around $1.75 in about 3 minutes of riding. And that saves me so much time in the morning doing those things. Now, I, who myself am an engineer, I don't like sitting up here and talking about and thinking about what are things wrong with here, but rather providing solutions. And the first thing that I saw is I like to start with a couple things. One, at work, going to and from work, the bike lanes, yes, could use some updating. That was one point that I think we're all in the overall majority on this one. Also, friends do love this when they come to visit. They think it's a great idea. It's a unique idea. It's also in a bunch of cities around elsewhere. So it's good for tourism. So that also brings up another idea. Segway tours inside of Columbus also operate on sidewalks. Might have to look at them and see what they're doing because they are 2 lanes with a handle. Also, another idea I had, I saw an accident actually happen, eyewitness account, and this is where I like to explain the difference between Birds and Limes. Limes, back wheel is a little bit harder than most. It's harder to brake unless you apply more pressure. I saw someone riding a Lime, trying to stop, slammed into the corner of Pins, which the Pins Mechanical Company on East Long Street, and they hit the pole and they had to go to the hospital, ambulance came. Now, another thing I like to bring up was vandalism. The vandalism, there's been countless birds that have been cut and destroyed from people in protest out of the idea that they do not like it. I went to go ride on one morning, and the terminal was cut and the wires were cut, and I had a video of it. Now, a couple solutions that I like. Mr. Williams brought up a couple ideas about holding things, and I like the idea about the basket. I think an idea about a basket would be very useful. Also, a 5-minute rules and regulation video. There's a Columbus Area Pedestrian Safety Committee that has a rules to the road rules to a road piece of a sheet that could be very easily converted into a video that someone could watch before hopping on a Bird, or maybe monthly. Another really interesting idea I have that I want to touch on before I get out of here is there's a company here called Root Insurance in Columbus, and they operate on 34 West Gay Street. They offer insurance plans based off of where you operate. So they use your phone. They charge based off GPS location to track and implement where you're going and how much you're driving. They do it with cars currently. They are in 21 states, and they're planning to put in 9 more. They are operating right here in Columbus. I think it would be mutually beneficial for the town of Columbus, for the city of Columbus, and the state of Ohio, as long as Birds and Limes, to think about reaching out to them. Now, I'm going to close real quick because I know I'm running out of time, but myself included would love these. I'm in favor of increased rules and regulations. I do think that they need to be monitored, and as of right now, I do agree that there needs to be a culture change, and I would like to be a part of the culture change. And I did apply to be a bird feeder, if we're doing puns, and a lime juicer. So I think a lot of people need to start considering that they do need to wear a helmet. And as of today, as a 23-year-old, I will promise to wear a helmet from here on out because it is the right thing to do and it is the right step to take. And I think we can all come to an understanding that will make this city much better for everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Foss, and welcome to Columbus. Mr. Niekirk.
Hello, Paul Nykirk. I live at 443 Dominion up in Clintonville. I use them all the time, and I just want to say they're wonderful. I love them. Please keep them. It's so much nicer than standing at a COTA bus stop. And if any of you have not done that lately, it's quite the experience. So I think they're wonderful. Wonderful toy. You can be safe with it. You don't have to spend this much, but if you want to, go for it. It's a riot. Anyways, have fun. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's testimony today. I want to reiterate that we introduced this legislation on the first reading occurred yesterday on Monday, September 17th. Second reading is scheduled for Monday, September 24th. I certainly thank everybody that came down today to offer their testimony in support or with ideas towards this important legislation and this emerging technology. And we certainly will take all of your comments under advisement. I'd like to thank Director Gallagher, Frank Williams, Deputy Chief Collins, Jeff Furby, Ms. Tobias, and all the interested parties that made sure that we were doing the right thing and being thoughtful with revisions to Title 21. I'd also like to thank Council President Hardin, Council Pro Tem Cinziano, Council Member Brown for coming in today and supporting this public hearing. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the police officers that were here this afternoon, and Matt Erickson in the City Council Legislative Research Office, and of course my team, Jeff Carter and Lucy Frank, and most importantly, the community for your suggestions and feedback. This concludes this public hearing, and we appreciate everybody for their time. We ask that if you have any comments or questions, you can contact our office directly to further make sure your input is received. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.